once a Hawkeye, always a Hawkeye. So first of all, thanks to everyone for coming to this today. When the USCA approached me about doing this with Dan, I get asked to do a number of speaking things, but this was like really easy. It's like, wait, I get to talk to Dan for like an uninterrupted hour about something that's really awesome. Like this was a no-brainer. So I'm really happy to be here and interview my friend Dan Luby, who's just a wonderful human, and you'll see very soon has a wealth of knowledge about all things music and business. And we're in for a really good conversation today. So I'm going to jump right into it because we have a lot to talk about. So again, thanks for everyone for being here. And again, we'll ask some questions at the end, and we're going to, you'll see two old friends sort of talking and covering a lot of business. But if you have things that you want to ask, please do ask at the end. We want to make this as well-rounded as possible. So Dan Luby graduated in 1996 with a Bachelor of Business Administration degree, and he currently leads Pepsi's digital supply chain integration, where he's orchestrating partnerships with big retailers like Amazon and Walmart. He attributes much of his professional accomplishments to the skills he learned at a young age through music organizations and ensembles, which of course includes the Hawkeye Marching Band. So for the many HMB alumni who have tuned in today, you should know Dan marched trumpet from 92 to 95. He was a member of the prestigious B and A rank, so he's a good player. And he remembers his trips to the Alamo Bowl and the Sun Bowl pretty fondly. We talked a lot about his time. Actually met his wife through band as well, not the Hawkeye Marching Band, but through band. They were both drum majors in high school, so this goes deep into his veins, and music and business sort of runs deep. So for our conversation today, we're going to discuss how music programs like band help compose leadership and teach skills needed to pursue careers in businesses. Skills like building a cohesive team, setting a vision, and executing long-term strategies. Dan and I share a lot of of common opinion on this, that music and business really do go hand in hand, and there isn't a better training ground than many music ensembles. So we're going to jump right into this today, and Dan has given this talk before, and it's just absolutely fascinating. So Dan, so welcome. Thank you for being here today.
It's so great to be here, Dr. Bush. This is truly going to be the highlight of my week, and just it's so spectacular to talk about this topic. As you alluded to, I've done this a couple of times throughout the Chicago metropolitan area, and to be able to bring this home to Iowa is just fantastic. So I appreciate you and the rest of the university for giving me this opportunity today.
Of course, we're great to have you. So let's start off with an easy one. So where are you from, and how did you end up at Iowa?
Yeah, so I'm a lifelong Chicagoan. But growing up in the early 80s, watching sports and watching football on TV, Iowa was the team that broke the Big 2, Little 8, Big 10 thing, one of the first teams to win the conference, with a gentleman named Hayden Fry and a fantastic quarterback named Chuck Long. And, you would say that in the mid 80s, I was already a Hawkeye, even though I didn't make a decision to go to where I was going to college until like 91, 92. But I grew up in the Chicago area, just north of the city. Like I said, like you had said, I was a drum major in my high school marching band, but always had a huge appreciation for the Big Ten, for the sports within the Big Ten. But then definitely when I became a Hawkeye, I never looked back. It was Iowa and a couple of other schools. Let's just leave it at that. But I have never looked back from when I decided to become a Hawkeye. And it's so fantastic to be here.
Wonderful. So what are some favorite memories of the university? And I'll add to that the Hawkeye Marching Band. Is there any person, any professor that inspired you? What were your sort of core memories from being here?
What's fantastic about the school is the people that you meet and the professors and just everything that I learned. I was a marketing major. I actually was in the first ever lecture at John Papa John, now Tippie's College of Business. And you start to meet some of those folks. But for me, to bring it home to the Hawkeye Marching Band, Dr. David Woodley was the director my freshman year. And I remember meeting him, and as I look back and looking at his leadership skills, and then Dina Cook, Dina Jensen, who is, I know, very active in the alumni band, she was the A1 my freshman year. And both of them, especially Dr. Woodley, instilled this ability of, the students own the band. The students are running the band. You guys are the ones who need to instill the leadership down to, at the time I was a freshman, And that really helped me for when I became an upperclassman, B1, you know, one of the leaders within the trumpet section, to say, hey, all of you are going to work together, and I'm going to now pass this on to you. And it's been each generation ever since. But I really felt that from Dr. Woodley of just, hey, this is your guys' band. I may have been drum major back in the mid 80s, but this is your guys' band. And Dr. Bush, I would say I see the exact same thing coming through with you, as I've known a couple of the folks that have played for you and just seeing you over the last couple of years.
Well, thank you. It's always, you know, sort of interesting to me that, you know, folks from generations removed can have literally the same conversation about that spot on the field that they, you know, that they in the pregame, or, you know, any of those, you know, the leadership things that you're talking about. You know, it's so fun. Like, you know, all of our current members don't necessarily know all of our alumni, and we're trying to bridge that as much as possible. But, you know, to see one of our current members, you know, talk to alums and have some of those shared experiences that everybody can relate to is just really special. And it goes back for so many generations.
It does. It does. And then you have those discussions, and then you start talking about, hey, what we're going to talk about today, about how you can be a leader that can then transcend any industry.
That's right. Excellent. So before we get into sort of nuts and bolts and music and how it relates to business, you know, how did Iowa prepare you for your career? So, you know, you talked about your degree a little bit. You know, what things, you know, did you feel like, you know, propelled you to your current position now, which is a big one? How did you get there, and how did Iowa help with that?
You know, I think Iowa's, you know, I'm going to pump the business school for a little bit here, because I think it truly is a fantastic business school. The way the curricula has continued to evolve, and if we go back to even when I was there in the early mid 90s, setting the foundation kind of statistically, you know, statistics was one of those that, I mean, candidly, I am not a huge statistics person, but I know that the understanding and such around how to use data, how to manage data, how to manipulate data, really propelled me into the supply chain career that I've now been part of for over 20 years. And the way Tippy kind of teaches that and looks at it from a standpoint of that analysis. The other piece I would say, the teams, the just work teams and class groups that we had. They were always diverse with different backgrounds, both culturally and professionally, and different majors. You know, I was a marketing major, finance, and so on. But that group type of learning that Tippy and Papa John kind of instill, I think is what really propelled me forward. And then I would just close from an H&B standpoint. The organization and the structure that you have to have, and I'll allude to it a little more, to be part of the Hawkeye marching band or any musical ensemble, because I wasn't just in H&B, I was in other parts of the band program, transcends every single day of my life around, well, here's how I have to structure my calendar, and why I look out 2 to 3 days in advance and be like, hey, can I move this meeting? Can I not? You know, people are like, well, why is Loopy moving all these meetings around? It's because I'm looking 5 days out, because I don't want to crash and burn into something, you know, that's not going to be there, right? So that structure is huge that I use every single day.
You know, I know we love our business majors, and that is one of the big reasons why, because they're some of the most organized people that are there. You know, they're seeing things come down the pipeline before I do. So we love our business majors in the HMB for lots of reasons. All right, well, let's jump right into this. So we've got a series of questions today that you know, talk about composing leadership and why these organizations like the Hawkeye Marching Band and other musical ensembles, for that matter, you know, go hand in hand and really do intersect with business. So we'll get right into it and get your thoughts, Dan. So tell us how the idea of composing leadership was developed and why participation in music has been really important to you.
So I had the privilege of being the Young Professionals president of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. And I did that. I was actually on the board for a couple of years, had a couple of positions, and then I was president for a couple of years. And I very quickly realized, you know what? None of these folks were music majors. They all have some level of appreciation, but we all are doing different things where music has influenced our profession. I personally obviously was involved in music all the way back. I played violin, then was trumpet player and such, but I also played baseball, football. I was involved in sports, and in my head, there's a lot of crossover. And we'll get into a little more of it, but where that crossover really comes into being, I was like, I want to be able to share with other people why being involved in music has some of the same pieces of being involved in sports, and why you should hire people who are involved in music, why you should encourage your children to be involved in music. Not everybody is a 6'4" basketball player. Not everybody is a 225-pound quarterback. How do you get folks involved to be, hey, I'm going to be a trumpet player, cello player, choral singer, whatever that might be, because there's a lot of things that cross over around building teamwork, being resilient, having the work ethic that we've already alluded to a little bit, as well as just being a part of a team. Whether you're a 5-person rock band or a 275-person Hawkeye marching band, you're part of a ginormous team, or a small team that really needs to come together. And that teamwork, and I alluded to a little bit in the opening about that teamwork you built through Tippy, transcends every single part of my day-to-day that I do when I work for PepsiCo.
Excellent. Yeah, those are all really good points. And you mentioned teams. There is the big 275-person team, but then there are so many smaller teams within that it's the correlations are striking. So it's just fascinating how all that goes together.
It does. Yep, absolutely. Yeah.
So how do you see involvement in music as benefiting anyone entering today's ever-changing workplace environment? And it is changing faster now than it ever has been.
It really has. And I've I would say over the last year or two, as I've conducted these, it's really moved to where I think being resilient and be able to be adjustable and nimble to change. And people may think, well, within a marching band or within a musical group, where does that necessarily play in? But when you think about it, the Hawkeye Marching Band does 7 different shows every year or more, and in some instances they only have 3 to 5 days to put those shows together. How do you throw it together, and how do you work on that being quickly? And oh, by the way, on Saturday morning it may be a complete downpour, and you're going to figure out how you're going to march on a field with that. Kinnick used to be grass, and at one point we had a game against Ohio State where people were losing shoes on the field. So how are you resilient against working through some of that level of adversity and really understand what's going on? But the other pieces really are around leadership and respect for the bigger team. And that really is that all of you are working toward a common goal. If you're working professionally within my immediate work team with the folks who manage the different customers that I lead, we're all still working toward a common goal. And that's how do we get the best possible service for PepsiCo. Whether you're working for a band, working with a band, how do you perform at the most optimal level? If you're a competitive band in high school, of which a lot of the folks in HMB were, how are you trying to compete at a very high level? So it's more than just that performance that you see on the field. And I would just end with 80%, I think it's like about 80% of the people in the Hawkeye Marching Band aren't music majors, folks. They are not going to go, and even those folks, they're not going to go on to be in professional music. It truly is, they're doing it for the love of the Hawks, or they're doing it for the love of music to be able to then learn those skills to transport to another career. They're not going to be music majors. So next time you go to a football game, think about that during halftime and pregame.
That's one of the interesting things. I don't know how many people know that stat about the HMB, but we are, by and large, non-music majors. 81% of the band, basically comes from a non-music, degree program. Like 13% come from engineering, a whole bunch come from business. But almost every degree program on campus has been covered or is covered at one time or another through the HMB. But everyone coming together for one goal, to make music and to entertain and to have camaraderie and all that is really special. And again, that's one of those generational things, and that everybody has that shared experience. Dan, you mentioned one thing that was you hit right on the head of one of my sort of large pillars for HMB in the vision, is that it's process over product. And you sort of mentioned, how do you overcome adversity, when you've got 3 days to put a show on the field, and sometimes you might have 3 weeks,
Right.
So we spent a lot of time talking about, what is the process of learning a show? How do we learn our drill? We learn the dot, dress the form. How do we play? How do we internalize the music, memorize where necessary? But the more we find that when we focus on that process rather than what the actual product is, we find that the product takes care of itself, because you've got a system in place and all of that. So were you able to, when you were in the band, sort of develop some of those philosophies for yourself through that, process and product vision?
I think that is really prescient from a standpoint of, especially in supply chain, we're always about how do we break down a process into its very specific details, and then where do you look for specific improvements. So some of you on the call may be very familiar with Lean Six Sigma and the trainings that go with it. I've gone through a couple of trainings to a green belt type of level. Doesn't mean that I can break things down into great detail, but that ability to process, if you think about it, I'll go as granular as, when you're marching on a field, if you're doing high step, which I never did high step in high school, had to try to do in college, and that was, I don't think I actually played a note for my first 3 games, Dr. Bush, don't tell Dr. Woodley, but I really don't think I did, because it's very difficult. But you break it down as simple as this sounds, of you break it down into toe up, toe down, and the whole thing with moving your legs and moving forward, or if you do just basic low step style of up and down, and learning what that detail looks like. Now that's very movement based, but let's look at that from a music standpoint and how I learn music. I learn music, you sight read through the whole thing to give it a try to know what it looks like, and then you start breaking it down into what those different parts are and how you coordinate that with a marching ensemble. Take that now to what I do professionally. If I've got a situation with a customer and I want to understand how do I problem solve getting you the right amount of Gatorade or the right amount of product in a certain time, I'm going to ask very specific questions that then I can go back to my team and create a process map to go ahead and improve upon. So for the career and the business that I've gone into with supply chain, and again, I was a marketing major that kind of took those skills to evolve into a supply chain lead. It becomes really, really important to be able to break things down into individual parts. And then you don't get overwhelmed with what I would call boiling the ocean, where you're going after all this stuff. I now can go ahead and say, all right, let me go back to how I did this in the Hawkeye marching band or when I was drum major of my high school. I broke this down into parts. We went page by page. We went form by form. Now I'm going to do the same thing as I try to problem solve something for my business.
And that's exactly what I tell folks who are calling for, for recommendations for students who are in the Hawkeye marching band. They'll say, well, how does so-and-so handle sort of a large project or something that comes with a lot of challenges? And I say, well, if you think about, putting a major Big Ten marching band show on the field in 1 week, how would a person that hasn't done that before think of that? Eyes would get big and all of that. But let me tell you about Hawkeye marching band members. They're able to sort of dissect the process, just like you said, and, attack it in a methodical way and not everything at once, and knowing what to prioritize, what not to prioritize, and then how to take information you learned, let's say that triplet in the third measure that's really fast, how to translate that to the triplet in the 35th measure as well, and learn the same thing, and sort of, and make that learning curve faster and faster, which is, it's a special thing, which is a great segue, by the way, because the next question is, what makes Hawkeye marching band members sort of unique? So what has it been about, being in a group like that would make a marching band member unique?
So I think one thing, and this is where I wanted to just flash up, if I can, we're going to test my Zoom sharing skills. One thing I think it's important, Dr. Bush, is to talk about how, from a leadership standpoint, the skills and the positions that you get are comparable to a football team or a consumer packaged goods company. So those of you who know what CPG is, basically Pepsi, Procter & Gamble, those types of companies, right? But we have similar hierarchies, and the leadership and teamwork that you get working in this type of structure, a lot of us are football fans. You sort of see in the middle there where the coaching comes in. I think the business piece on the far right, any of us who are in any kind of profession understand C-suite, VP, and down from there. But any musical ensemble, and this is specific to, candidly, a marching band, but you've got a director, you've got a drum major, you have a section leader that Dr. Bush alluded to a little bit of, hey, you've got someone in charge of a section, but then within there, you've got individuals in charge of different pieces. And then you've got your individual contributor. I'm lucky that I've been everything except for a director, and you don't want me to be a director. But, when I was a squad leader, when when I was a squad leader, and Dustin Helvey was our section leader, one of my really good friends. And I understood how that hierarchy necessarily worked, then going up through the organization. So I think that's one key piece. I think another is just really understanding, and I'm going to shut my screen off here just for a second. Where's the stop share button? I lost it. Sorry, everybody. There it goes. So the other piece is just really understanding that as one person succeeds, you all succeed. So, that as you went back through that hierarchy that I had flashed up, if you're in charge of this, of the squad, which, in the Hawkeye marching band would be like you're in charge of B rank, for example. And I was B1 my senior year. So I was in charge of B rank. That's 10 people, 10 to 12 people, depending on the size of the line, that you're responsible for making sure that they are that first of all, that they're there on time, that they're learning their music, learning their marching, and how that moves up, and being able to take those skills and transport them to leading a team of 10 people, or then leading a team of 40 people, like I've done in the past with people who report to people who report to you. Learning that as a drum major that I did in high school, I think bodes well to any kind of leadership skills. So when I say that being involved in music translates to business, that is exactly what I'm talking about. And you saw the football piece is very similar. You're going to have your team captain, you're going to have your position captains, right? Your quarterback may look like they're running the show, and they are running the show on offense, but you've got your lead wide receiver, you've got your lead offensive lineman. Same thing with the Hawkeye marching band. You've got your lead second trumpet, you've got your lead second mellophone, whatever it might be. So I just really can't emphasize those comparisons, Dr. Bush, and how they're just synonymous across the board.
And you mentioned another thing about, choosing leaders, right? And having all the things in place. You and I have both been, in other places where, where the lanes were kind of blurred and people didn't necessarily have a unique role that they stuck to and whatnot. And that can, of course, roll into chaos. And we've both been there in other, in other facets of our lives. But I think that's one of the really nice things that we do see, and not just marching bands, but, all of these ensembles, worrying about your own part as it relates to your section, as it relates to the whole band and the vision, and beyond that. So a bit of a follow-up, which is actually not on our list of questions, but I think you'll have an interesting answer. One of the things that, is maybe the most, I'm not gonna say challenging, but the most, sort of fun and maybe the unknown for me is letting that person lead who has not led before. So again, in Hawkeye marching band, we've got, any number of leaders that progress as, like you said, squad leaders into section leaders and undergraduate staff, and then, anywhere from there. But what is your take on, getting that person who maybe hasn't had the opportunity to lead and getting them into a leadership position to sort of begin that journey? What are you looking for, that spark or potential that you see?
You know what I love about that question, and the way I'm going to go at it is sometimes you think, and we make these decisions of, hey, leaders are going to be people who are very outgoing. They're the type A's. They're the ones who are just always at the front of the room. They walk into a room and light up a room, all these different pieces. And assuredly, you look for some of those traits. But I've also had instances where folks who come in do a great job, they do great work, they ask fantastic questions. They're not going to be the first that necessarily raise their hand. They're not the ones who are necessarily jumping right into things. Those are the folks that I am more than happy to find ways to put into leadership roles and be like, here's why you can do this. You understand the material. You know what the vision is across the group. You've coached people before. You've trained people. You understand how to build a team and work together. And I can go ahead and coach folks who have that passion and that work ethic. And I think sometimes we just go to the loudest person in the room or the person who opened, I joke with folks that, myself and some other people in the organization, we walk into a conference room and people are like, okay, well, now I'm just going to be quiet. And I am like, I am just going to sit here and say nothing because I want you to speak up. I want someone else to speak up and get what their opinions are. Because at the end of the day, one thing that we are missing, I think sometimes, and we're getting better in the business world, is getting other people's opinions and getting that diverse thought process. Because even if you don't agree 100%, what I have found is there's always some little nugget that you can put into the broader proposal and the broader vision of what you're coming out with that just makes the overall result that much better. So, what I kind of look for are those folks who have that inner potential that you just need someone to help bring it out in them. And I would say the Hawkeye Marching Band is one of those areas that I've seen that happen. I mean, people that were freshmen that, maybe were really, really quiet and everything, all of a sudden become section leaders. And you see that all the time. It's just amazing to see how that plays out.
That's true. I'm still, that's one of the best parts of my job is watching a person develop as a whole person as they come through the program. And, that kid that might have been a little bit squirrely when they came in as a freshman, to see them sort of step into a leadership role and assume real responsibility and start to lead a team is, by and large, one of the, the sort of the greatest joys of my gig is to see them take on those things and, and then go out and do whatever they're going to do. Like you had mentioned, there, so many of our students are not going out to teach music and all that, but they'll keep music close to their heart and all of these skills that they've learned for whatever it is that they do. So that's really good insight too. By the way, we've got Hawkeye Marching Band drum major auditions that are coming up this Saturday. We've got 5 very excited candidates, and I'm really excited to see that. So I'll keep some of those things in mind as we interview them. So it's a full day of auditions, but we're really excited to our next drum major. Excellent.
Absolutely. Charlie Taylor beat me out, but if I'm going to lose to anybody, Charlie Taylor would have been to lose to, believe you me.
He's quick. That's what it's all about.
He spun a mace better than anybody, so I had no chance.
Charlie's one of the best. So let's keep going. What skills do you see from folks with a musical background that are universal to any career in which one might embark?
I'm going to, communication and listening, I think really are key. Listening being part of communication, right? It's part of the broader piece here. But when you're on the field, 300 or 100 yards, which is 300 feet by 50-foot football field, or on a symphony stage like the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, you still have to be consistently listening and paying attention to what's going on, from person to person. And, when I attend some of these, different performances, I'm always kind of looking, who's looking at who's looking at what, who's kind of doing some of that listening. And I think that's a really, really key piece. I think another is just, again, around being resilient, but another great example where I think that resilience, that listening comes together. I had an opportunity. I was attending a performance with the Chicago Symphony. It was actually their big kickoff fundraising event, maybe, 6 or 7 years ago. And the conductor unfortunately had some, was unable to perform. So the lead soloist comes out and has to conduct the orchestra with the head concertmaster person. And you can see the interaction. They're looking at each other. She's conducting with a bow, and just all this interaction that you're watching here. And you're like, if that was a professional business environment and and we run into a big event, for example, several years ago, some of you may remember the flood that happened up in Cedar Rapids at our Quaker facility, Pepsi's Quaker facility. How do we bring all of that together to figure something out very, very quickly? That experience of doing something like I just described within music lifts very, it's not easy, but lifts to be able to do that then professionally. So I think that resilience and that ability to understand across that resilience to be able to understand when issues happen and to be able to quickly adapt to them, I think becomes really, really important. And those are just 2 examples that, stick in my mind that I've kind of seen over the years. And I will just end with, rain during an Ohio State-Iowa game where people wind up losing their shoes on formerly grass Kinnick Stadium. So, that's another one. You can't march without shoes. I don't know how you do it, but it's hard.
It's hard to do.
It's hard to do on wet grass.
There you go, on the wet grass, right? So there, I know we're going to do most of our Q&A at the end, but there have been a couple of good things that have come up and actually a good sort of dovetail into what you just said. So Lauren, one of our fabulous former alto saxophone majors who was in the band with me, Lauren Lavin, asked a wonderful question here. And this sort of gets into maybe the development part of your life. You take a position and you develop to another position and you sort of move on and progress in your career. So how have the leadership skills you developed within the Hawkeye Marching Band helped you with your career development beyond and including, but beyond obtaining your current position?
Lauren, thank you for the question and thanks for being here today. So I think for me, a lot of it has helped me to relax and just realize that when leadership opportunities come, I'm going to find ways to go ahead and go after them. Now, in some ways, I've kind of done that, going back to high school and such, but I think as I've had leadership opportunities within the music program. So going back to high school at the Hawkeye Marching Band, it removes those barriers so that when different leadership types of event like opportunities happen within the workspace, hey, we want you to lead we want you to lead a 40-person team. We want you to work with 7 different Walmart markets outside the United States, half of which speak Spanish, and we know you don't speak Spanish, but we're going to figure out how you're going to go ahead and do that, and be able to create that leadership and create those leadership opportunities. And you're always going to be nervous going into a new role. I think that's human. I think anybody who says they're not nervous going into a new role, one of two things: they're either lying to themselves or it's not enough of a challenge for them. So it's one of those two things. So I think for me, Lauren and everyone, it's just been that opportunity, that the opportunities that I've had because of music that have then transcended my ability to then say, hey, we kind of would like you to lead the Chicago Symphony Orchestra Young Professionals Group. What do you think? And I said yes. I had some words before that, but I did say yes. I said hell yes. So it's you jump right into some of those things, and I think it just positions your ability to be confident as a leader and really work through some of that adversity.
And I think you and I both agree on this. You have to be uncomfortable in order to really make progress. We talk about that in the band all the time. Doing things the same is super easy and it feels really good, except you can't evolve, you can't progress. So you need that feeling of the unknown or being a little bit uncomfortable to really push things forward. So what might be something we do, tomorrow in the Hawkeye Marching Band is a little bit different today. It might be the same thing, when you get out there in the world too, and you're working. Everything is not the same day to day. The world changes very quickly, as we all know. But having that feeling of being okay to be uncomfortable is something I think that can, be a real catalyst for people. I know you and I have been in a lot of situations, which is wonderful.
Yeah. I work in e-commerce. This has changed, and it's changing every single day. And I'm in conversations every single day, every week about, hey, well, this, I know we've been doing this for the last year. We have to rethink. We have to think differently. I have way too many Steve Jobs examples I throw around with my team, but the think differently one is just one of the key ones that I continue to try to push the envelope with. Is every day you have to think differently about how do we change what we're doing, and not just for change's sake, change for the right reasons.
Change that matters, change that really pushes the vision forward, which is
exactly.
Awesome. Let's keep going. So leading a Big Ten band is unique, as not everyone is going to have a career in music, which we've discussed. How do you see marching band shaping future leaders regardless of their professional endeavor? And this is a question that's near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, I think, I think the way it really shapes future leaders is it creates this work ethic. It creates this structure. I tell folks, my best grades at Iowa were in the fall, which makes no sense because I was a member of the Hawkeye Marching Band, and by senior year, I was actually on the homecoming committee as well. So, from mid-August to end of October, I had no time. And your weekends are completely consumed by the Hawkeye Marching Band. You don't get to homework until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But it really provides you that structure, and it provides you the opportunity to then, when you are coaching and leading another team and leading a group at work, it really helps you to, and especially now, when someone comes to you and says, hey, I've got to take the afternoon or the day off because I'm helping to take care of my kids because, we're working from home, or we are, I have to go help my parents because we're in the middle of a pandemic and here's why and here's what's happening. It provides you that permission and the opportunity to be a lot more empathetic and a lot more understanding of what those moving parts are, and the fact that, hey, as long as we're working on getting our work done, at the end of the day, that's what's important. And being able to instill that in folks by having that structure and that understanding of where do I find the time? Where do I find the time to have better grades in the fall than I did in the spring? It's because I was busy and I had that structure to it. And if you have that, I think that really helps you, and it helps you become a better manager because you're able to have that empathy and really be a leader who's not just pushing, get this done, no, that's not how you're going to motivate people and get things done. That's not how Dr. Woodley was able to inspire the rest of the band to come up organically from the bottom and instead of just pushing from the top. And that's what I've seen just from you and things that I've seen with some of the videos the band has done and pregame stuff and just all of that stuff, which I think is pretty awesome, Dr. Bush.
Well, and it's, you mentioned grades, and one of the stats that I'm most proud of is the HMB has like a crazy high cumulative GPA for 270 people. It's like 3.4, which for 270 individuals anywhere on a university campus, can really, it's really good. But what our members, find, I think by and large, is that band teaches you how to work smarter, not harder. When you don't have hours to sort of to cram things and to read every word of a 25 page dense book that you're reading and whatnot. How do you get the pertinent information? How do you stay up on things? How can you work 15 minutes here and 15 minutes there, and grab an hour before rehearsal? So it's always been my opinion, this is sort of my soapbox, always been my opinion that the arts in general, and being involved in a structured organization like the HMB or any musical ensemble that's that way, it really does teach you sort of intrinsically life goals and life lessons, and how to manage all the things that life throws at you, like homework and comprehensive exams and midterms and all of these things. And I think our students, if they're they're good at managing their time, and they let the band sort of teach them those skills, become better students being in the Hawkeye marching band, and I think they see that once they're through their program.
I mean, I would say that another page, we talked about the 7 different shows you do, and some you truly do have 5 days to throw together. Some, like homecoming, you start working on 3 to 4 weeks or whatever in advance because you want to do a great homecoming. Of course, you want to do a great homecoming show. But the same type of thing from a work standpoint. If I've got a big presentation or proposal I'm going to have to do, it's 2 to 3 weeks out, I'm not going to wait 48 hours before, and it really does help to be like, I put myself in a mode of, I can start this, and to your point, I can spend maybe 15, 30 minutes on it over the course of several days leading up, instead of cramming 3 hours in at the very, very end. And it's a similar concept with when you're developing a show. Sometimes you do truly have 3 or 4 days, but usually you do have a couple of weeks and you're working on multiple shows at the same time. And how do you compartmentalize that? And how do you understand that? And that's something you don't get unless you've been part of a group like an HMB or a musical ensemble that has to do that type of time management and that type of workload management.
That is very true. I mean, and it helps so much with that. Yep. Awesome. All right, we've got one more prepared question, then we'll jump to some Q&A, and I see a lot coming. Awesome. This is great. So last prepared question that I have for you, Dan, what can the business community do to provide better visibility to the importance of music education and the skills it develops for future professional success?
So I think there's a couple of things. I think those of us who have been involved in music, do not be afraid to talk about it. I mean, I have conversations with folks all the time, and then all of a sudden I'll drop in that I was, in my college band or whatever, and it's amazing the number of people that come back that say, well, I played clarinet in high school and blah, blah, blah. And it's funny that all of a sudden the light switch goes on and says, of course you did, it's kind of, because it's that camaraderie, but it's just similar with sports, right? I've tried to, in some ways, make that similarity because sports get so much press, right? We don't get, music doesn't get quite the press, but sports get so much press, but there is so much overlap. And where you can tout that as managers, as leaders, and really bring that together, I think is so important. Those of you that are parents on the line, if you encourage your kids to be involved in, any of the fine arts, whether it's, dance, ballet, music, theater, any of those types of things, as well as, obviously encouraging sports as well. But I would just close with the more we can do to support the fine arts, the better. It's most people who are involved in them do not wind up going into a career. They're not going to be Dr. Bush, director of the Hawkeye Marching Band. No offense, sir. They're gonna go on to be the business leaders, the inventors, the engineers, the lawyers, the doctors, the philanthropists, the administrators at the University of Iowa or the rest of the Big Ten or colleges across the US. That's where folks are going to be. And the more we can give folks the opportunities to learn and be involved in these areas, the better, which is why this is, at the end of the day, I'm not here today. I'm not working where I am at Pepsi if I was not the drum major of my high school and a member of the Hawkeye Marching Band.
Sir, if we're not careful, Dan, people are going to think we might have rehearsed this conversation because it was another great segue you gave me there. So you mentioned support, and and we do have all of these alums that go out into the world, and they're doing such incredible things. That again, one of my joys is to see our members go out and make a difference in the community with whatever that they do, but they always come back and they always want to support the current band because, like you mentioned, it does make a difference. It made a difference for them. In many cases, it made a difference for their kids. In some cases, their grandkids. And we have legacies in the band that have 3 and 4 generations and that. So one of the big campaigns that we focus on every year is the One Day for Iowa campaign, the Hawkeye Marching Band. And this campaign historically has done a great deal of good for the band. We've been able to enhance our instruments. We've been able to, provide better accommodations when we travel. We've been able to give the kids in the Hawkeye Marching Band, not kids, adults, give the students in the Hawkeye Marching Band, great experiences, great engagement, and, really make them, feel what it's like to be a member of a Big Ten marching band. So 1 week from today is the university's annual giving campaign, One Day for Iowa. The Hawkeye Marching Band is a featured group in that. Again, we've got a number of different unlocking and matching challenges. We have a $20,000 unlock for having 20 or more recent grads in the last 10 years. We've got $10,000 coming in for, or say $11,000 coming in for having 141, which is our birthday, 141 years.
Sure.
Number of donations that come in that will be unlocked at 141 donors, and then another $10,000 match that's come in, that's dollar for dollar. So why is it important to give back in that way too, in a financial way, and to support the current band and what it does for that? What is your vision on support?
I mean, for me, I will definitely be, helping to contribute, as well as, members of our 90s kind of generation that I kind of stand up here, a couple of $1,000s that we will, make sure to contribute here over the course of the next week. But continue to just the funding to help support the arts in general, and just to support the performance and the education that just comes through from being part of the Hawkeye, but being part of the Hawkeye Marching Band. It's for me, it's the group of friends that get together every single year, to go see at least one game. We come from all over the country to get together, and we see each other, and that camaraderie keeps on going year round. They have to put up with me texting at 8 o'clock in the morning on football Saturdays, and just all that group that comes together that you can then just build from an alumni standpoint. But being involved in this organization, and it's great to see, it's amazing to see how we thought we had it really good in the early 90s, to see now how they're getting their own apparel. You're saying that the new truck is awesome. The new truck is flipping awesome. But those types of things, they may seem intangible, and they may be like, okay, well, it's a truck. The amount of pride and the spirit and what that really means to those of us who marched and those of us who were part of it. When I go on the field and I see that, there's new sousaphones, or quite a bit of the band now has their own, have specific performance horns. Those types of things, you're like, oh my God, because I was scared to death that my really nice trumpet was going to get flipping ruined by being, a member, just because, right? That now I don't have to worry about that, that my parents spent $2,000 on, right? Or whatever. I don't even know what a bot costs anymore, right? So, but that's my point, is that the more we can do to help and to contribute and really grow this program and keep the program at the top level as one of the top bands, not just in the Big Ten, but in the entire United States, the more I can do to make that happen, the happier I will be, the happier Hawkeye that I will continue to be.
It's remarkable, in a state of the world where budgets are never seem to be increasing, they're always decreasing, and and things are tightening in that way. The HMB has been able to progress, in those ways because of our alumni, because they've stepped up, because they said this is important, this matters, music makes a difference in the lives of people, so I'll give back. So again, we're just over the moon and thankful for all of the alums out there that do help and give and support us, and make the 141st and the 142nd marching band, the Hawkeye marching band, the greatest addition yet. So that's awesome. Let's go to our audience. There's been some really good Q&A coming in. I'm going to start actually with Arlene Hauk. Arlene is the vice president currently and president-elect of the Alumni Leadership Board for the Hawkeye marching band. Since you mentioned how folks are getting really involved, and she's been one of the people that have been instrumental in making some of these changes. She actually heads up a networking event for the HMB where students are able to ask questions of people that are in their field, alums of the band that have been out in the world for a few years, and and sort of like this actually. And she's been doing this, but she's got a great question here. So, has your experience performing with the HMB helped you become more confident with speaking in front of a group or in a business setting?
So that is a fantastic question, and I would definitely say yes. And here's why. It really is from a sense of numbers and just having that experience. Now, granted, you're on the field with 275 people. Not all eyes are looking, going to be looking directly at you. But getting on that field and being like, there's 70,000 people here, because there's 70,000 people there, and looking up at, if you've never been on Kinnick, I think is actually one of the most intimidating stadiums because of the way it's shaped. I've been on the field at the Big House. It doesn't, in Michigan, it doesn't look that big because of the way Michigan is. Michigan's a very flat stadium. Kinnick is a very vertical stadium. And that intimidation and getting over that and doing it, 30 times or 28 times, whatever the number winds up being over 4 years or 5 years, really helps out. So I personally, I'm a little different in this. I actually love being in front of people. I will volunteer to talk in front of people. If someone needs a speaker, I'm always the first to volunteer. And I think part of that, though, is because of experience of being in front of a large group, being in front of the Hawkeye band, being in front of an audience, but then also talking to just the band itself. When I was drum major in high school, it's a 120-person band that you would talk in front of and be like, okay, here's what you have to do, and here's what I'm asking, here's what we're asking for. So do my palms still sweat when I go up to, yeah, absolutely. But do I know how to be prepared, and do I just love the interaction? I'm always nervous right before I get going, but once I get going, it's just invigorating. I really think that the public speaking and being in front of an audience just transcends being part of, being in front of a crowd of 70,000 people.
There's an adrenaline factor there, isn't it?
There is. It really is. Yeah. 100%. Yeah.
Awesome. Let's go to a Hawkeye a lot of us will be familiar with, including yourself, Dan. So Chuck Long asked in the Q&A,
oh, Chuck.
Is it true that the Hawkeye marching band has more fun than the Hawkeye football team?
So
careful what you say here.
So Here's my take on this from Mr. Chuck Long, is that we have a ton of fun. We work hard and we play hard, and I think the fun that we have, similar, I'm very similar to the Hawkeye football team, is all about how do we build camaraderie. There's nothing that anybody's like, oh, you have to be at this, you have to be at that, whatever. But it is truly another way for you to build camaraderie and build those lifelong friends. Chuck, I know, has lifelong friends from his days, playing for the Hawks, coaching for the Sooners and such. I have the same thing with my lifelong friends from being in the Hawkeye marching band. And those are the folks that have been, those are the folks that then I can come to when it's events like this, or when it's just different ways of asking questions and, hey, I'm struggling with this or I'm struggling with that. Who can you bounce ideas off of? So while the fun is definitely there and there are tons and tons of fantastic stories, I like to think that the fun and all of that camaraderie comes around to also have a more, for lack of a better word, sophisticated reason behind all of it.
That's right. Absolutely. So you did a little bit of traveling when you were in the band. Sarah asked, what is your favorite bowl game memory?
I'm going to do everything I can. Okay, my favorite bowl game.
I'm tempting fate here.
I cannot tell this story without crying. I'm going to try as hard as possible. Senior year, we beat Washington in the Sun Bowl, and the sun set over the Washington side and the entire Hawkeye side. The entire Hawkeye side lights up with sunshine, and we all sing the alma mater, and we all completely break down. It was like 10 of us that knew we would never march again together. And it is truly the best memory ever of just all of us knowing we were done. We had marched 4 years together. We were finished. And I remember walking back to the buses, and Charlie Taylor, who was a drum major at the time, comes to me and he says, so I'll publicly say it, my nickname was Kermit, and he says, Kermit, think about this. The Hawks have been in, at the time it was like 15 bowl games, maybe it was 10, I don't know. But only two or three bands had seen them win, and we're now one of them. And that was pretty awesome.
It is.
Sarah, I'm gonna get you.
I knew that one might get you. And for those of you who know Dan, that's real emotion, because it really does feel that way about the Hawkeye Marching Band and his experience at Iowa, which is incredible. And those shared experience reverberate through generations of HMB members and shared experiences. It's really incredible.
Yeah.
Another question from Dan Steinberg. In 1995, who were some of the HMB that you mentored as being section leader? There were a lot of great people in the bands in the 90s and all that. And who are some of the folks that you know that are out there doing great work today?
Yeah. No, I think a lot of the folks back then, you've got Wendy Roberts, Lisa Fellinger, a lot of different folks from that era back then that, went ahead and became section leaders. Jackie Kleppe has gone on to be just fantastic at the university. And
still a supporter.
And still a huge supporter. So a lot of the folks that really came up through those ranks, that then, it's fun to then sort of see, how they continue to mature and go from there. So, a lot of great members from that senior year, and helping to lead that group. Bridget Phelan was another. She went on to be, I know she's been a very successful band director across Iowa as well.
And some of the most confident people that I know of, of course, attributing that to the HMB. Would you say the HMB helped you build confidence?
Oh, absolutely. No, I mean, I think there's I think you sometimes wind up, and I'm a victim of this is you become your own worst enemy. I become very critical of myself. But you have that confidence that, hey, I'm going to try to jump in and try to do what I can. And because of that, sometimes it's like, what am I getting? What am I really accomplishing here? But I think there's definitely a level of building confidence by being involved in the organization.
That's right. That question came from Lori Jade, and I thought it was a good one because we do see so many good folks go out into the world and build that confidence in whatever they're doing, which is fantastic. So we're just about out of time. We're at the top of the hour, the middle of the hour, I should say, at our hour mark. We'll leave with one more final question. And this is sort of an amalgamation of some of the Q&A and some of the things that we've hit on. But if you could leave us with, your best 90 seconds of why Hawkeye Marching Band and why does it make a difference in so many levels, what would you tell the folks that are out there thinking about whether or not to get involved in an organization like this?
So here's my take, is that being involved in the Hawkeye Marching Band is going to build five key traits that I think are important to any profession that you're going to go into: teamwork, communication, resilience, leadership, and work ethic. And those 5 things you're going to get in different ways that are going to be extremely important in whatever profession you decide to go into. Some may be more important than others, depending on what you decide to do, but there isn't anything that's out there that isn't going to involve all 5 of those. And I would tell you that 5 years ago, resilience wouldn't have been on that list. It's on that list today. And I think that is something that, if I did this 5 years ago, again, I wouldn't have talked about as much. And I think that's something I've learned that, oh my God, I did get that 20 years ago or 25 years ago when I marched, that now has become even more important. So being involved in the Hawkeye Marching Band is going to give you the right foundational skill set that's going to launch your career in whatever field you decide to go into, and forever how far you want to go ahead and commit yourself to.
That's incredible. And that's really good advice too. So Dan Luby, one of our greatest Hawkeyes, one of the great alums of the Hawkeye Marching Band, one of the great alums of the University of Iowa. Thank you for being here today. These chat from the old cap sessions are wonderful, and they have been for a number of months now. It was just really good to hear your take on this and why band, why music, why the arts can play such a pivotal role, in the intersection of business and really any endeavor that a person has. We talk a lot in the music world about, music has its own virtues and it's worth studying for the sake of studying, and it is, but it really does have so many incredible benefits to the rest of what life can throw at you. And you are living proof of that, Dan. I mean, really are. I mean, you're an incredible human, an incredible professional, incredible executive, and we're proud to have you among our ranks as an alum. So I want to thank Dan, personally and professionally for being here, and thanks for all of our audience today, checking all of these sessions out and asking really good questions today. And if you have any information or want any information more on this, I know Dan's an open book and would love to have further conversations, and I would too. This is a topic that's really near and dear to both Dan and I about why band matters, why music matters. So again, thanks to everyone for being here. Thanks for Tony for being our surrogate host in the background, making sure all this ran really well today, and the University of Iowa Center for Advancement. I can't talk enough about that organization, what they've done for the Hawkeye Marching Band, what they do for the University of Iowa, and why engagement matters with our alums and our donors and our community. So thanks to everyone, and Tony, if there's not anything else, I'll let you officially end the session, but I'll leave you with this. Go Hawks.